She bought a first-class ticket like anyone else. But when she boarded the plane, everything changed. A successful investor, elegant and composed, ready for a routine business trip, suddenly questioned, doubted, and humiliated by a flight attendant who couldn't believe she belonged in that seat. But just 14 hours later, that same flight attendant would be facing the executive board, and the truth would come out in a way that stunned everyone on the plane. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire airline. You're going to want to hear this. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from, and if you believe every person deserves respect no matter where they sit, hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories just like this one. It all started with what should have been a normal flight. There is a certain kind of silence you come to recognize when you've lived long enough in a country that refuses to recognize you. It isn't loud. It doesn't yell slurs in the street or burn crosses in your yard. No, it's much more elegant than that, refined, even. It's the silence in a lobby when you walk in wearing the wrong kind of shoes. The hush in the boarding line when your skin doesn't match their assumptions. The pause, barely perceptible, before a smile is offered. And that silence? It greeted Evelyn Hart the moment she stepped into Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. She wasn't flashy. No designer sunglasses, no entourage trailing her heels. Just a simple ivory suit, pressed with care, and a carry-on with wheels that didn't squeak. She moved with purpose, not entitlement. She had earned everything she had, not inherited it. And that, too, unsettled people. She checked in without issue. TSA waved her through with the ease reserved for seasoned travelers. Yet the glances started there. A man in line behind her narrowed his eyes slightly, trying to place her. Not a celebrity. Not someone he recognized. Just someone who didn't quite fit the story in his mind. But Evelyn had grown used to that. She had spent her life studying the way suspicion wrapped itself in civility. As she walked through the terminal, polished floors reflecting her heels like glass, she passed luxury perfume ads with pale-skinned women smiling out at no one in particular. Past store windows filled with silk scarves and Rolex watches she could buy 10 times over, but had no interest in wearing. Her presence alone was the contradiction. Wealth, without the performance of it. Power, without the permission of others. She entered the Delta Lounge with her head high, but her guard higher. The receptionist smiled, polite, but clipped. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" she asked, already reaching toward the screen before Evelyn could answer. That's how it always begins. A question that isn't a question. A challenge hidden inside the folds of protocol. "Yes," Evelyn said, and handed it over. The receptionist blinked at the class, first. Then blinked again at the booking code, corporate executive priority. Then once more at the name, Evelyn Hart. There was that pause again. A half-second too long. "Thank you, Miss Hart," she said at last, masking surprise. "Enjoy your stay." Evelyn gave a soft nod. She was already walking past, not looking back. She had no appetite for small theater. Inside the lounge, she sank into a leather chair, opened her tablet, and reviewed slides for tomorrow's meeting, a meeting that would decide the future of Delta's new sustainability venture, a meeting where she was the key stakeholder. And still, she knew someone would ask her to prove she belonged. Because that's the ritual. That's the slow burn of American contradiction. You rise. You work. You endure. And still, they look at you like you've borrowed the seat. No one called her names. No one raised their voice. But the prejudice was there, smoothed down like marble, waiting to rise beneath the surface when the moment allowed. This was just the beginning. The soft overture of an old song. The tests would come, subtle at first, then harder. And Evelyn Hart, who had survived boardrooms and backhanded compliments and years of being underestimated, would meet them all head-on. Because sometimes the loudest resistance isn't about shouts. Sometimes it's about showing up, again and again. Until the world no longer questions your right to be seated. By the time Evelyn Hart reached the gate, She had already endured 3 more of those subtle ruptures in the fabric of civility, each one small enough to ignore, but familiar enough to burn. The man at the newsstand had said, "Ma'am, that's a pricey magazine," before ringing it up. The woman at the coffee counter had asked her twice if the credit card she used was hers. And when Evelyn had paused at a window to take in the sight of a plane lifting gently off the tarmac, a young man passing by had murmured, "Wish I had that kind of time," as if her presence, her stillness, was an offense to the hustle. But Evelyn kept moving, gracefully. Not because she was unaffected, God, no, but because she had learned long ago that showing your wounds only made them press harder. She reached Gate A5 with time to spare and joined the first-class line. The people around her were dressed in that effortless casual outfit that cost thousands to maintain. Haircuts that whispered private stylist, shoes that hadn't touched a sidewalk in weeks. She was not like them. And they knew. More importantly, they assumed. The gate agent was a young black woman, sharp, efficient. She scanned Evelyn's pass without hesitation and offered a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Hart." Evelyn returned it. A flicker of ease bloomed in her chest. Sometimes, kindness is quiet armor. But as she walked the jet bridge and stepped into the aircraft, that warmth faded fast. The air in first class was cooler, not in temperature, but in temperature of spirit. It's where the hierarchy breathes deepest. Where glances speak louder than voices and every gesture is measured to decide if you belong. The flight attendant approached like clockwork, her heels clicking on the aisle carpet. She was statuesque, blonde, the kind of woman that Southern society still considers presentable. Her name tag read Caitlin Reeves. Her smile was taut. Not false exactly, but strained, as though she'd been trained to show courtesy, but not necessarily warmth. "May I help you find your seat?" Caitlin asked. Evelyn answered with calm confidence. 2A. The woman blinked. Just once. But it was enough. And there it was again, that momentary slip. That pause of the eyes. That shift in posture. The flicker of thought she was too polite to say aloud. "You?" Evelyn stowed her bag overhead with ease. Years of travel made it muscle memory and sank into her wide, leather seat. The hum of the cabin surrounded her. A bubble of hush, the illusion of peace. But peace in America is too often a performance. Especially when you are what the world refuses to expect. Caitlin returned a moment later with a tray of pre-flight drinks. She handed champagne to a man across the aisle, then another to a couple near the bulkhead. But when she reached Evelyn, she hesitated. "Would you like something to drink?" Her tone was clipped, as though Evelyn's presence unsettled the balance of what she believed this cabin should look like. "Champagne would be lovely," Evelyn replied, her voice smooth as piano keys. Caitlin nodded, but didn't move. "I just need to check your boarding pass once more." The sentence was delivered gently, almost as a favor, but it landed like an accusation. Evelyn froze for a moment. Then, without flinching, she reached into her bag and handed it over. The attendant inspected the same document the gate agent had already scanned. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, or perhaps disappointment, before she returned it. "Thank you, Miss Hart." Evelyn smiled. The kind of smile black women have perfected over generations, the smile that says, "I see you. I know what you're doing. And I will not let you drag me down into it." She sipped her champagne when it finally arrived. Behind her eyes, memories stirred. Her first business pitch, where they'd asked if she was the assistant. The car dealership, where they'd assumed she was there for financing, not ownership. The boardroom where they mispronounced her name even after 3 meetings. All of it layered into this moment, into Caitlin's glance. Into the long silence that followed the clink of glass on the tray. Because this flight wasn't just a trip. It was another proving ground. Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the city's skyline. Inside the cabin, the light dimmed, artificial night for artificial peace. And as the aircraft doors closed, Evelyn knew the real turbulence hadn't begun. Not the kind that shakes the fuselage, but the kind that shakes your dignity. The kind that hides behind polite uniforms and company policy. The kind that asks for your boarding pass again, not because they need it, but because they can't imagine you belong. The engines began their slow rumble as the plane taxied away from the gate, but Evelyn Hart heard another sound louder than turbines, the quiet sharpening of suspicion. There is always a curtain on planes, but not the one they pull across the aisle before the meal service. No, this curtain lives between glances, between names mispronounced, between the way some people are greeted with welcome and others with questions. Evelyn sat straight in her seat, the fabric of her ivory suit unwrinkled, her presence composed. But inside, she felt the tightening. The small rooms we are pushed into when people don't believe we've earned the space we're in. Caitlin, the flight attendant, returned. She was too practiced to betray outright discomfort, but Evelyn, a woman who had been reading silences since childhood, saw the tremble in her efficiency. The pause before asking something unnecessary. The faint, nervous glances were not meant to be seen. "Would you mind just confirming your seat one more time?" Caitlin asked, this time not even pretending to be casual. It was the third time now. The third time a woman with a name tag and polished shoes had asked her to prove her existence. Evelyn looked up slowly. "Is there a reason, Ms. Reeves?" Caitlin stammered. "It's just there have been issues with passengers switching seats. Sometimes people sneak into first class after the doors close." Ah, there it was. The narrative. Not a person. Not an investor. Not a first-class passenger. A possibility. A threat. A shadow in someone else's seat. Evelyn handed over her boarding pass once more with a calm that came from deep training. "You've already verified this. At the gate. At boarding. And just a few minutes ago." Caitlin nodded quickly but didn't leave. She lingered, looking at Evelyn as if waiting for something else to surface, something that might justify her discomfort. Evelyn met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I understand," she said softly. "Sometimes we don't believe what we see, when it doesn't fit our story." And with that, she folded the boarding pass and returned it to her pocketbook. Caitlin left. But the wound stayed. A murmur stirred near row 2B. A middle-aged man in a navy suit leaned slightly toward Evelyn, his expression unreadable. Not hostile, not friendly. Just aware. He had watched the entire exchange. Evelyn offered him a polite nod, but he looked away, pretending to return to his in-flight magazine. She knew the type. The kind who prides himself on neutrality. The kind who says, "I don't see color," even as the world stains itself with it. It was safer that way, for them. The flight rose above Atlanta, and the city shrank into twinkling beads of light. Evelyn turned toward the window, but her mind turned inward. She thought of her mother's voice on their front porch in Alabama, years ago. "Baby, you'll have to be twice as good, but they'll still look for reasons to pull your card." She'd spent her life collecting credentials like armor, degrees, honors, shares, influence. And still, a flight attendant could unravel it all with a glance that said, "Prove it again." There was no law broken. No slur shouted. Just the violence of disbelief. Polite. Professional. Insidious. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Outside, clouds glowed silver against the night. Inside, Evelyn breathed deeply, folding her hands in her lap. She wasn't angry, yet. She was preparing. Because some injuries don't show on skin, and some fights don't begin with fists. They begin with someone asking you, gently, if you really belong. And they end, not with rage, but with truth said plainly and powerfully. Evelyn had boarded this plane for a business meeting. But the business of dignity, she now realized, would come first. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the air in first class had grown heavier, not from altitude or pressure, but from the invisible weight of presumption. Evelyn Hart sat poised in her seat, legs crossed, a tablet open on her lap filled with charts and pitch decks worth millions. Her mind should have been on quarterly returns and capital expansion, but it wasn't. It was on Caitlin. On her face, her tone, her pauses. Because sometimes racism doesn't arrive as a knife, it arrives as a clipboard. It arrives wearing lipstick, a navy blue uniform, and a name tag. And it smiles while it asks you the same question over and over again. Evelyn tried to work. She forced her attention onto the glowing screen in front of her, where rows of data danced across the page. But concentration shattered each time Caitlin passed by, each time Evelyn felt the glancing eye, the tightening jaw, the deliberate politeness that now sounded less like courtesy and more like a test. The other attendant, a young man named Devon, moved through the cabin with ease. When he addressed Evelyn, his voice held no judgment, no tightness, only care. "Anything else I can bring you, ma'am?" he asked after serving her meal. "No, thank you," she said. "You've been kind." He nodded, and Evelyn meant it. Kindness is never small when the room grows cold. But Caitlin would not let it go. She appeared again, just as Evelyn had begun reading through a memo about overseas partnerships. "I just have one more question," Caitlin said, standing by her seat with her hands clasped too tightly. "I've reviewed your boarding record and, well, your ticket has an investor designation code. That's unusual. I've never seen that before." There it was. The attempt to make her explain herself. The disbelief wrapped in corporate jargon. The real question, who let you in? Evelyn set the tablet down, slowly and calmly. "That code is correct," she said. "I'm an investor. One of several high-net stakeholders your airline invited to this flight. I'm on my way to a strategic meeting in Los Angeles." Caitlin's eyes flickered. A battle waged behind them, between denial and dawning realization. "But usually," Caitlin pressed, "those codes are for people traveling with teams or under corporate delegations. Are you traveling alone?" Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the smile of a woman who had been here before. In banks, in hotel lobbies, in boardrooms. "Yes," she said. "I'm traveling alone, because power doesn't need to arrive in groups. And I do not require an entourage to be legitimate." Caitlin didn't speak. She stood there, frozen in the tension between what she'd believed and what now stood before her, undeniable and whole. As Caitlin walked away, Evelyn felt something stir deep in her chest. It was not sadness. It was not even rage. It was a deeper grief, the kind you carry when the world refuses to recognize you, not as another, but as equal. She looked around the cabin. No one had intervened. No one had asked if she was okay. Most had kept their eyes on their books or their movies, content to watch injustice only if it grew loud enough to interrupt their champagne. And that, Evelyn thought, is the American way. They won't call you a name, but they'll let someone else do it, quietly. They'll say nothing, and believe that makes them innocent. Evelyn turned back to her tablet, now dimmed to sleep mode. She didn't need to finish the presentation. She would give it tomorrow, confidently, eloquently, and on time. But now she had another presentation to prepare. The truth of what happened on this plane. Not because she needed revenge. Not because she wanted heads to roll. But because silence, even from those with means, is a betrayal. And Evelyn Hart had not spent her life rising from nothing to be quiet when it counted. The plane hummed over clouds. Above the world, but still carrying the weight of it. And somewhere in that cabin, beneath dim lights and chilled wine, a reckoning began, soft at first, but gaining speed. Because even in first class, at 35,000 feet, a black woman, or any woman who isn't expected to hold power, must still fight for the right to simply sit in peace. There is a courtroom that travels through the clouds, one without a judge, no jury, and no defense attorney, only witnesses who pretend they see nothing and a plaintiff who must, once again, defend her very existence. Evelyn Hart had not come to court that day. She had come to fly. But some of us don't get to choose when the trial begins. It started with whispers. Caitlin, The flight attendant lingered near the galley curtain, speaking in hushed tones to another crew member. The words weren't meant for Evelyn, but like most trials against the soul, the accused always hears the indictment. She's alone. It doesn't add up. Could be fraud. Fraud. That was the word that struck like ice between Evelyn's ribs. Not spoken to her face, of course. God forbid the truth should ever be direct. No, it was floated in private corners, passed hand to hand like gossip in a church vestibule. Fraud, because her presence disrupted the order of things. Fraud, because she had slipped into a seat they thought someone like her couldn't afford. Fraud, because to some, dignity worn quietly is always suspicious. The man in 2B, a white man named Samuel Whitaker, glanced over, discomfort writ large across his face. He'd heard it too. He didn't speak, not yet, but Evelyn could feel the conflict dancing behind his eyes. She said nothing, because she had learned, long ago, that responding too quickly confirms their suspicions. And staying silent only fuels them further. A cruel game where every choice is wrong. Then Caitlin returned. "I just need to check with your seamate to confirm something," she said stiffly, her voice dulled by exhaustion and something sharper, defiance. She turned to Samuel. "Did you see this passenger sitting here? Is it possible someone switched seats?" Samuel blinked, stunned. "She's been here since we boarded," he said slowly, like someone trying to translate morality into policy. And Evelyn, who had endured much condescension, surveillance, unwelcome hands in the past, felt a new humiliation. This wasn't about theft. This was about control. This was the search for a reason to make her justify being where she already was. She closed her tablet with finality and spoke, her voice a velvet blade. "I've had my ticket scanned, verified, and inspected no fewer than 3 times," she said, her tone steady, her gaze unwavering. "If you still have concerns, I suggest you call the pilot. Or, better yet, ground control. But do not mistake your discomfort for protocol." The cabin was still. Even the hum of the engines seemed to hush itself. Caitlin's face flushed, but she did not apologize. She simply stepped back, stiff and silent, swallowed by her own pride. Evelyn turned back to her seat, but she no longer felt peace in her body. She felt exposed, as if her every move, every breath, had been placed under an invisible spotlight, as if she'd been put on trial in public with no crime, no evidence, no defense. Later, Samuel leaned over, voice low. "I'm sorry," he said, genuine, awkward. She nodded. It was a small gesture, but in a world of quiet injustice, even recognition can feel like a revolution. Outside, the stars pressed against the sky. Inside, Evelyn sat alone, a woman of wealth, influence, and power, still forced to prove she had the right to sit in a seat she had more than paid for. That is the weight of being seen and not seen. To be both visible and unbelievable. And it is not the loud hate that wounds most deeply. It is the polite doubt. The "are you sure you belong?" that hides behind a smile and a badge. Evelyn knew she would land in Los Angeles tomorrow. But tonight, she remained midair, caught between who she was and what the world was willing to believe. The lights in the first-class cabin dimmed, bathing everything in the soft glow of artificial dusk. But there was nothing soft about what Evelyn Hart carried in her chest. Some women carry pearls, others carry handbags. Evelyn carried history. The kind of history not written in books, but in bruises and boardroom stares. In polite betrayals. In the ceaseless, grinding requirement to explain oneself in rooms built for forgetfulness. An hour passed in silence, but Evelyn did not sleep. She watched the rhythm of the flight attendants, the dance of their hands and hips as they served drinks and cleared trays. She watched Caitlin move like a woman holding something fragile, except the only thing she was protecting was her own ego. When turbulence rolled through the fuselage and the plane pitched slightly, Evelyn welcomed it. There is honesty in turbulence. The air doesn't lie when it shakes you. Not like people do, with their apologies that aren't apologies, their ma'am-s that slice instead of soothe. Then came the breaking point. Caitlin, clearly still restless, stopped beside Evelyn's seat as if summoned by some force neither of them could name. I've double-checked the system, she said, voice low, conspiratorial. Your booking came through a corporate investor code. Evelyn said nothing. Let her speak. It's just, we're not used to seeing that on a ticket like yours. Alone. No assistant. No entourage. She didn't say it. But she said it. You don't look like power. Evelyn stood. Slowly, with grace sharpened into a blade. She looked Caitlin in the eye, and the softness fell away. What is it you're asking, Miss Reeves? She said. Because I think you've already decided what you believe. Caitlin fumbled. I just need to verify. Verify what? Evelyn interrupted. Her voice was a whisper, but it struck like thunder. That I'm not someone who stole her way into this cabin? That I'm not pretending? That I'm not an anomaly dressed in linen? Her voice trembled now, not from fear, but from exhaustion. I am not your exception. I am the proof you've never been required to see. Caitlin's eyes darted to the nearby galley, as if seeking refuge. But there was none. Not from this truth. Evelyn took a deep breath. She pulled her phone from her jacket, tapped twice, and showed a screen to Caitlin. It wasn't boastful. It wasn't dramatic. It was a simple subject line from Delta's VP of Partner Investment. It read, looking forward to finalizing the expansion proposal with you in LA. No flourish. No announcement. Just a fact. I don't need to convince you of anything, Evelyn said. But I need you to understand something. I'm not the only one like me. I'm just the one you decided to question. Caitlin stood stunned. Her lips parted. Her breath caught in the narrow cage of her chest. There would be no apology today. Not yet. Just the slow unraveling of certainty. And Evelyn? She did not need contrition. She needed change. When she returned to her seat, the cabin felt different. Not warmer. Not safer. But clearer. Samuel and Tubi whispered, that was something. And Evelyn just nodded. Because the world had made her a mirror. And today, she held it up. And made someone look. Outside, the stars watched in silence. Above them, a woman with grace and scars in equal measure had reminded the sky, and the airline beneath it, that dignity is not a privilege. It is a right. Even here. Especially here. At 35,000 feet, where the masks we wear finally slip in the pressurized air. There's something strange about descending from the sky after being suspended between heaven and human cruelty. As the plane tilted gently downward toward Los Angeles, Evelyn Hart looked out into the night, her reflection in the window split between stars and the silent ache of endurance. In that small oval of glass, she did not see a businesswoman, nor a shareholder. She saw every woman who had ever been asked to prove her right to exist in peace. The cabin stirred with the rituals of descent. Tray tables up, sea backs forward. And beneath it all, shame unspoken. Caitlin, the flight attendant, passed by Evelyn's row again, slower this time, as if proximity might somehow serve as penance. Her mouth formed the beginnings of a sentence, perhaps an apology, but it dissolved into the recycled air. It was not courage that failed her. It was the inability to see Evelyn as human enough to deserve it. That is how it works, you know. They humiliate you, then fear your dignity. Samuel leaned over once more, awkward but sincere. If you ever write about this, he said, I hope people read it. Evelyn didn't laugh. She didn't smile. Because it wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. He had witnessed what happened. He knew it was wrong. But like so many men, so many Americans, he hadn't known how to act until it was safe to say something. And safety, in this country, has always been a privilege rationed to the ones who look like him. As the wheels met the runway with a softened thud, Evelyn felt the jolt of landing not just in her bones, but in her soul. This flight, this so-called incident, was not new. It was not rare. It was not accidental. It was a ritual of doubt performed with a smile. It was the ancient American dance of gatekeeping, performed now not with dogs and hoses, but with questions and scanners and just following procedure. At the gate, passengers began to rise. Evelyn remained seated, her fingers wrapped around the handle of her carry-on, not from fatigue, but from intention. She had learned that sometimes, to reclaim one's dignity, one must wait while others scramble to exit. When she stood, Caitlin was there again, at the front of the cabin. "Have a good evening, Miss Hart," she said, voice tight, professional. Not warm, not regretful, just words. Evelyn met her eyes one last time. "I intend to," she said, then added, with the quiet fire of the generations behind her. "And I intend for others like me to as well." She stepped into the jet bridge, into the belly of LAX, into the world that had always tried to keep her out and now had no choice but to greet her. Her phone buzzed as the signal returned. A message from her assistant. A confirmation from the Delta board. Another investor asked her to speak at a conference. Life, as always, moved forward. But Evelyn knew the burden would follow. Because every time a woman like her takes a seat in first class, America takes a test. Not of infrastructure, but of soul. And every time it fails, someone like Evelyn is forced to teach the lesson all over again. When Evelyn Hart stepped out into the terminal at LAX, the air did not smell like victory. It smelled like something older than triumph, like fatigue, like memories, like the truth. There are certain battles you do not celebrate winning, because the fact that they must be fought at all is already the tragedy. This was one of them. The terminal pulsed with life, children whining, luggage wheels rattling, fluorescent lights humming above exhausted travelers. But Evelyn moved through it like a woman apart, not because she felt above it, but because she had been forced to carry something no boarding pass could scan and no seat assignment could hold. She had carried the burden of being questioned, yet again, for simply existing in comfort. And now she carried the knowledge that despite her silence, her poise, her credentials, her tailored suit, her investor badge, none of it, not a single thread of it, had been enough to shield her from suspicion. Because the truth is not that people don't see color. The truth is they see it first. And they often stop looking after that. The next morning, Evelyn sat across from Delta's executive vice president, a polished woman named Vivian Markle, in a high-rise that pretended to touch the sky. The glass windows stretched behind her like the promises corporations make, transparent, reflective, and fragile. Evelyn recounted the incident without embellishment. No dramatics. No vengeance. Just facts. The way Black women have learned to deliver truth in this country, measured, clear, unshakable. Vivian's face grew taut. She apologized. She promised review, training, policy changes. But Evelyn had heard promises before. She leaned forward. "I'm not just here as an investor," she said. "I'm here as a mirror. And you need to decide whether this company can bear to look into it." Vivian didn't reply right away. And maybe that was the most honest thing she did. Weeks passed. Meetings were held. Memos were drafted. And Caitlin, the flight attendant who could not reconcile Evelyn's presence with her perception, was placed on probation, sent into bias training, and made to volunteer at a community center that worked with under-resourced youth. Whether that would change her, Evelyn did not know. People rarely change because they are punished. They change when they finally see what they've been unwilling to see. 6 months later, Evelyn was back on a plane. A different route. A different crew. No sideways glances. No duplicate questions. No requests for proof. And that, she thought, was the tragedy and the beauty of it. It felt unusual. It felt like peace. And peace in America is still rare enough for a woman like her to notice when it arrives. As she disembarked at JFK, a voice called out behind her. It was Devin, the young attendant from the original flight, now out of uniform, casual and smiling. "Miss Hart," he said. "You probably don't remember me." But she did. You were kind, she said. He smiled wider. They rolled out the new training a few months ago. Word is it came from an incident with an investor on a LA flight. That was you, wasn't it? Evelyn paused. Then she nodded. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. Yes, she said. But I wasn't the reason. I was just the moment that could no longer be ignored. They parted ways. And Evelyn, suitcase in hand, walked through the terminal, not lighter, but clearer. Because what she had carried wasn't just the humiliation or the anger. It was the clarity that power means nothing if it doesn't lift others. She didn't want the apology. She wanted the system to remember her when she wasn't on the flight. She wanted the girl in 12A, the woman in coach with the head wrap, the elder checking in with exact change and a paper ID, to be treated as though they too belonged in a world that too often forgets them. And that is what she carried off the plane. Not her laptop, not her luggage, but a truth James Baldwin knew too well. The world is held together, really it is, by the love and the passion of a very few people. And Evelyn Hart, tired and unyielding, had chosen to be one of them.